This is the reply I received from the Department of Works and Pensions. Thank you for your recent correspondence about changes to help with rent from this April. Government ministers receive a large volume of correspondence and they're unable to reply personally on every occasion that I have been asked to respond. The coalition government has already brought in some changes to housing benefit, largely affecting the private sector. Ministers believe that people receiving benefit should have to make the same choices about affordable housing as people who are not receiving benefit. Local authority staff are responsible for assessing help with rent, and they can explain the effect of some of the changes. They can make discretionary housing payments in some circumstances to people whose benefit falls short of their rent. Payment is at the discretion of the local authority. Currently, those who live in the social rented sector generally have their rents met in full from housing benefit, and their entitlement is not affected by whether or not they under-occupy their homes. However, this is no longer considered sustainable, and from this April, housing benefit for working age tenants in the social rented sector will be restricted. This under-occupancy charge will apply where people live in a property that is considered too large for their needs. As well as helping to contain growing housing benefit expenditure, this change should encourage mobility within the social rented sector, strengthen work incentives, and make better use of available social housing. Ministers believe that we need to improve the way we use our social housing stock. There's widespread mismatches between the household size and the size of accommodation occupied by these households. Benefits are paying for nearly 1 million extra bedrooms for people under-occupying their accommodation. This is in sharp contrast to what happens in the private sector, where tenants are more likely to consider what is affordable in terms of accommodation size and downsize when necessary as their circumstances change. Over 250,000 households live in overcrowded conditions in the social rented sector in England. 1.8 million households are on the waiting list for social housing in England alone. Ministers believe that social landlords should be encouraged to make the best use of their housing stock. There are examples of social sector landlords already doing that, demonstrating that they are able to take on the economic realities and come up with innovative solutions to long-standing problems. It is estimated that approximately 1 in 5 tenants living in the social rented sector and in receipt of housing benefit will be affected by the change. Over 80% of those affected will be under-occupying their home by just 1 bedroom and are likely to have an average reduction in the housing benefit of around £12 per week. There will be a 14% reduction for tenants with 1 extra bedroom and a 25% reduction for those with 2 or more extra bedrooms. Local authority staff will be able to advise on how individual people will be affected. There are size criteria which will determine what is appropriate for particular families. Ministers looked very carefully at the feasibility of developing specific exemptions that have been requested by a variety of groups, but it's not been possible to design exemptions that can be defined narrowly enough to be both affordable and simple to administer. Ministers are aware of the impact that this is likely to have on some groups. That is why they announced that we would add an additional £30 million to the discretionary housing payment budget. This additional funding is aimed specifically at helping two groups. The first is disabled people who live in significantly adapted accommodation to enable them to remain in their existing homes. The second group is foster carers, including those who need to keep an extra room when they are between fostering. The additional funding comes on top of the 190 million already set aside for the spending review period to help local authorities implement the housing benefit reforms, which include an extra 130 million for discretionary housing payments. We will be updating the discretionary housing payments guidance to local authorities in the run-up to these changes being introduced. Local decision makers are better placed to make informed judgments about the relative priorities and needs and to target the limited resources more effectively. Implementation work is now underway, and local authorities who will deliver this measure have already started to publicise the changes and to contact those likely to be affected. Landlords are also providing information and support to their tenants. These activities, combined with the information that this department has provided on its website for advice organisations, should mean that claimants are starting to get the right level of information so that they can start to think about the choices open to them.